everyone. We're going to get started. For those of you who don't know, my name is Pam, Pam Walls. I'm a board game designer and the founder of ProtoTO. Thanks so much for being here. I'm looking forward to spending the weekend with all of you. Thank you for being here. It's going to be lots of fun. I have a few announcements to make before I introduce Erica. First and most importantly, the bar is open, so please go get a drink. If we don't buy enough, I'm going to be charged for it, so please. You're really helping me out if you go get a beer. Okay, a reminder that the game showcases start right after Erica's talk at 7:45. So right after Erica's talk, if you don't mind just helping put the chairs to the side, just so it's easier for people to walk around the tables, that'd be great. We can put them back after the showcases are done. Okay, so if you have any questions while you're here at ProtoTO, you can ask at the registration desk or any of the volunteers wearing a ProtoTO t-shirt. You'll notice I'm not wearing one, so I'm trying to wear my designer hat a little bit more this weekend. So my sister Meg, who's right over there, she's going to be the on-site coordinator. So if you have any questions, yeah. Yeah, she can probably answer most of your questions. Thank you, Meg. Okay, so we're trying to make this weekend mostly announcement-free. So we're going to be flicking the lights on and off about 50 minutes before the end of a session or the end of a break or the end of a showcase. So just keep an eye out. If the lights go on and off, that means you probably need to wrap up pretty soon. Okay, so I just want to mention our code of conduct that we created with thanks to Nicole Hoy and Meg. Just the four main tenets of it. There's more information on posters up around the room as well as at the registration desk are. Just be aware of how your actions and words affect others. Ask for consent before touching or taking photos or videos of someone you don't know well. Don't take any photos of someone with a no photo sticker. You can get those stickers at registration. And use correct pronouns and gender neutral terms and just be welcoming and inclusive. So basically just don't be a jerk. If you want to learn more, you can read about the full code at the ProtoTO website. Okay, so I want to thank all of our volunteers who are making this weekend possible. I'm not going to list all of you, but thank you so much. You're so great. Also, yes, thank you. And, also, all the mentors and buds who volunteered their time to members of the community. Thank you to all of our mentors and buds. No? I also want to thank our sponsors, T-Shirt Elephant, Michelle from Board Again Games, Print and Play, and Panda Game Manufacturing, as well as our partners Breakout and Fan Expo. Also want to thank all of our great raffle sponsors. There's a lot of great prizes up here at the raffles, so please take some time to enter, get some tickets at the registration table. Okay, that was quick. Okay, here we go. So, I just mentioning the raffle. That's one of the main ways that we get funds to pay for ProtoTO. So again, you're also helping me out by getting raffle tickets. There's a lot of great prizes. Gloomhaven is up here. There's a lot of good stuff. So there's 4 different raffle draws. So take a look to see when each raffle will be drawn. Okay, that's it. Here we go. So. I'm going to now introduce Erica. I'm so excited she's doing the keynote for ProtoTO 2018, Brain Candy, Inspiration, and Ideas. So Erica is one of the most prolific designers I know, and always has so many great ideas brewing. So I'm very excited to hear her speak more about creativity and ideas tonight. Erica is an elementary school teacher by day and a board game designer by night. She has 2 games currently released, Roar from IDW and Ink Monsters with Albino Dragon, both co-designed with Daryl Andrews. Erica has 2 more Kickstarters scheduled for this year with Renegade Game Studio and Grand Gamers Guild, and more games contracted to come in the future. Erica is the co-host of the Meeple Syrup Show, a show about board game design and publishing. Erica is also one of the directors for the charity Path of Play, which raises money for autism support, donating games to therapy centers, and subsidizing autism therapy for families in need. So please join me in welcoming Erica.
All right, so as Pam says, I have a lot of a background in just creativity, and I guess I never really thought about how to generate ideas because I'm at the point now where they just sort of come. But a big part of that came from the fact that my background was advertising, education, psychology, and things like that, where you have to generate ideas all the time. And so going through all that training and combining them all, I guess I've sort of created this giant, I guess you can say a bag of tricks to generate ideas that I do naturally. But it's really important sometimes to narrow in on the different ways to generate ideas. So one thing I want you guys to do is most of you got Panda boxes. Can you open them up? Because I'm going to make this somewhat interactive as we go. And if you've got paper and pencil, you're going to want to use it because I'm going to get you to start generating ideas while we go. All right, so bust them open. Because if you're a kinesthetic learner, you got to touch things. All right. While they're doing that, I'll just, as Pam said, this is just some of the games that I either have out currently or are about to come out. I have Roar, I've got Ink Monsters, Ghost Sisters card game comes out next month, and Bosk, I was told, is going to be kickstarted in November, though it might be coming direct to retail. This is all fun stuff that publishers decide, not me. So at some point, it'll be there. But as you've noticed, there's really big diversity up here, and so we'll talk about sort of just different ways to come up with ideas, because once you have all those different ways, you're not going to come up with the same idea again and again. You'll always get something different out of it. As we're going, I'll say, please try the techniques as you go. They're not all going to be for you, but it'll give you a chance to narrow down the ones that work for you. Some of you are naturally already going to be good at some of them, but you won't know about the rest until you try them. Okay? All right, so first thing as we talked about is we all do have strengths and weaknesses. Just because something's a weakness doesn't mean you're not necessarily good at it. You probably just didn't get time to practice it yet. So yes, for some people, certain types of generating of ideas can be maybe a little bit discomforting or just not natural. That's something you're going to have to try to work through, okay? So sometimes you will just have to push yourself that little bit if this is what you want. So number one thing, and this is really hard. This is hard for anyone I've ever asked. This even came up in a panel I did a few weeks ago. And the idea is, do you ever stop having that imposter syndrome? My answer was no. I asked, Kevin Wilson was on the same panel. I asked him, he's like, no. It just doesn't go away. But I just want you to know, you have to tell yourself, I'm a game designer. If you make games, you are a game designer. And because a lot of the times, it's our own self-confidence that gets in the way of creating something, okay? And I want to talk about, so I'm going to break this presentation down into 3 steps. Most of it's going to be spent on generating. There's a lot of different versions of how to generate ideas, and I'm going to try to touch on as many types of, as I said, learners and thought processes as I can, because we're not all the same. The next one is, well, you have to make a choice. You have to pick an idea so that you can get to step 3, which is make the thing, all right? But number 1 is where a lot of people get stuck. I think the most common question I get is, how do you come up with so many ideas so quickly? Well, you've got to let your brain keep firing. And that's a big part of it, is a lot of us have kind of turned that off. So this is what I want to talk to you about first, is sort of like an improv game. If you say no, you've already lost, okay? And we all kind of do this. We have these ideas and we're like, no, that's not smart enough. No, people are going to make fun of it. No, that's too silly. No, that's been done. No. How many times have you just said no? How are you going to come up with a yes? Okay, you have to stop it. I know it's probably harder than you think, but you can adjust your thinking. If you start thinking more positively, if you cut that no off, you will change your thought patterns. There's tons of studies I won't get into, but just know the way you think now doesn't mean it has to be the way you keep thinking. You can train and reprogram your brain. So the number 1 is, when you're generating ideas, stop saying no, because that comes later. That comes when you're creating something and you're like, oh, now I need to say no. But you don't start here. There's no such thing as no in generating ideas, okay? Keep that in mind. And the other thing is, could you imagine if all of us stopped and said, well, that's too dumb. I can't put that out there. Someone's going to make fun of it. Yeah, let's just say certain things would never exist, right? Could you imagine if, well, some of you might know Dr. Seuss is not his real name. But could you imagine if you said to somebody, oh, I'm going to make these wacky characters, and I'm going to sell them to kids, and there's going to be all these books. Well, imagine if that got second-guessed, right? That's pretty out there. So I just want to remind you, there's plenty of people who have just gone with it and been successful, okay? All right, so some of the things that are really important before you start generating ideas, you kind of have to think about who you are. There's the teacher side of me again, but I would say who you are as a learner. You need to know what you're capable of or what you need, okay? So some of the things you want to look at is, what kind of environment are you? Are you someone who needs to have background noise? Are you someone who can't take noise? Well, That's already going to be an issue if one of those two things isn't happening, right? You're not already in the environment that you need. Do you like to work from images? Do you like to listen to something? Do you like to, where do the ideas come from? And we'll talk about some of those techniques, but start to go, as we go through it, pick out things that make sense to you. Doesn't mean that's all for you, but some of it will be for you. The next thing is, can you work with other people around? Now that's gonna be a big one when we come to the idea of collaboration. Maybe you can't work with other people. Maybe you can, in which case there's some good things that can come from that, but if you can't, you need to know that about yourself. And the last thing is, when do you feel creative? Some people think of themselves as night owls, or they're morning people, or whatever it is. If you already kind of think of yourself as one of those two things, you already sort of know your best time to work, right? You don't want to be tired. You don't want it to be like yet another thing. You're running out of time. If you're putting all those parameters around yourself already, you're kind of setting yourself up to fail, right? So really think about who you are before you start this sort of thing. Set yourself up to succeed. Okay, and it's just paying a bit more attention to yourself and your own needs. All right, so we're gonna start with visualization. If you are a visual learner, you already do this, all right, but not everybody does. This is where you picture things in your head. This is a great one when you wanna come up with something just based off of something that's loose. So we're gonna do an example of it where I'm gonna read you a little something. It doesn't necessarily have the most detail, because what I want you to do is, some of you will have to close your eyes, some of you won't. Again, it depends on what kind of stimulus you need. And I want you to picture what I'm saying. And then I'm gonna have some questions about it, because I bet you most of you are gonna come up with different things, purely from the same example, okay? So we're gonna give this a try. If you're someone who needs to close your eyes, I'm gonna say close them. If you can picture things while your eyes are open, go for it. All right, so you're hurtling out of control, going faster and faster. If you don't act quickly, there's going to be a collision. You start to pray to any god that might be listening. All right, can you see what's going on right now in your head? All right, so the first question for you is, what vehicle are you in? How many people are in cars? How many people are in spaceships? How many people are on bikes or something like that? Do you notice how this story already went in some very different directions? That was the same prompt for everybody. How many ideas just came out of it, right? And so this is something you want to think about. That was a very, very simple example, but you all just saw something different. And what you saw could very easily be a game, right? And that was, as I said, one of my questions was, are you even on Earth? Because you were thinking, what surroundings did you see? Are you on a road? Are you in space? Are you underwater even? You all saw something different. So visualization is a great way of taking something where you might have a visual, like a picture stimulus, or even an auditory stimulus. You could be listening to an audiobook, whatever it is. But as you're picturing things, what you're picturing is enough to come up with something else. You've come up with a story, right? And that story can easily turn into a game. So any little stimulus, if you can see it, can be the next thing that you can make. All right, so we're gonna do another one with visuals, because again, if you're a visual learner, these will already kind of catch something for you. I'm showing pictures. They're just straightforward pictures. But what I want you to do is, as you're writing, I'm gonna go one at a time, and I want you to write down an idea. What would that game be? All right? So the first one, what would it be? Hopefully you're just having little things that start to fire for you. If you don't, this is something where you're gonna have to get into it a little bit more. The more you practice, the faster the ideas come. It really is like training a muscle. All right? So that could be something. What game is this? Or this. I don't know about you, I don't think I've seen a game that was all about seahorses. I'll give a shout out to Rec Raiders, but there's other animals in that one. What about this one? Sorry if I'm in your way. Just signposts, but what could that be? What about this? I actually had an idea about a game about beavers. Could be just as good as anything else. You have this worker placement ready to go. Or this. Or this. or this. Not one of these things is related, but you very easily could come up with ideas based on any of them. And these are just random images that I pulled from Google. I just randomly picked something out of my brain and went, okay, picture from that, picture from that. It's just as long as something stimulates your brain in any way, it is good enough to work from, okay? If you looked at something and you said nothing came to mind, well, that's the wrong stimulus for you. You gotta look what you can. Now, if you are someone who thinks like this, I would recommend starting a folder somewhere on a computer and just start dumping photos into them. Every time you come across something, you're like, oh, that's really cool. Pop it in there. Because it'll probably trigger something later when you want to have one of these brainstorming moments, okay? Just go through the folder. Pick a couple. I'll talk about another example shortly, but sometimes just smash something together. You might come up with something really interesting, okay? So this is more just kind of going for the visual people. Next one we're talking about is collaboration. Again, some of us can do this and some of us can't. You will figure out if you are one of them by trying to work with somebody. Just as a little warning, if for whatever reason your first attempt to work with somebody doesn't work out, it might not be that you can't work with people. You might not be able to work with that person. All right? I've got friends of mine I would love to make something with, but guess what? No matter what we do when we try to put something together, it doesn't work. And then other people, we can come up with something in an hour, right? You got to find that click. And there really is such a thing as chemistry when it comes to collaboration. You don't really want to force it. So what's really neat about collaboration, obviously, is that there's new ways of thinking. None of us think the same. So when you're bouncing ideas back and forth, you're going to come up with something that you never would have come up on your own. The really nice thing about it is troubleshooting is so much faster, okay? When you're trying to work through an idea, something that might have taken you 3 months to figure out, you could probably have talked through with another person in like half an hour. Because they're going to see things that you see, or don't see, sorry, and you're going to see things that they don't see. Because again, you don't think the same way. But you're looking for two brains that can work together. So I will say, it's not for everybody, okay? If you know you are that person, you know who you are if you are, don't worry about it. It's just this would not be necessarily the method for you, all right? But collaboration is a really interesting one. And you can get really interesting relationships out of it too, because think of, if you're familiar with advertising at all, in creative fields, most people are creative teams. There's a reason for that, all right? It really is one of the better ways of generating ideas quickly and coming up with something that's maybe a little more diverse in thought, all right? All right, so the next one, and I feel like this is sort of where a lot of people start with design, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. A lot of the times you'll hear things like, oh, this is like if this game and this game came together or had a baby or whatever you want to say. Or it's got a bit of this and a bit of this and a bit of this. There's nothing wrong from starting there. You can be inspired by a game. An inspiration from another game or starting point in a game can be something as small as, I really like that mechanic. What would I do with that? Or, I like this delivery method. How would I do that? You can hate a game and come up with more inspiration from it than something you even love sometimes. Because you're like, I hated this so much, this is how I'd fix it, all right? Or, you know, if you played a game and you're like, oh, I just didn't like it, but you know what? That one mechanic was so cool, I would actually base an entire game around it. I'm thinking villainous. So, again, this is probably where a lot of your brains go. There's nothing wrong with this at all. Just make sure whatever you're doing is distinctively different enough that it's just not that game again, right? Retheming something isn't enough. It's about how you combine it or how you're inspired by it. But the goal at the end of the day, if you're doing something more like this, is what's your version of that, okay? Because your view is unique, even if maybe the game premise isn't. And just watch that there's not a million games already out there with that theme. That's all I'll say about that one. All right, this one's a bit of an interesting one. Some people are good at it and some people aren't. Reverse thinking is kind of like reverse problem solving. So sometimes when you're trying to figure out a problem, you say, well, how do I make this not happen anymore? Sometimes the actual thing to say to yourself is, how do I make it happen more? Because once you figure out how to trigger it, you could probably figure out how to turn it off. So if that makes sense to you, this is already something that would be a good technique for you. If it doesn't make sense to you, this is just not your logical thought process. So the idea is to always kind of reverse a standard problem, and you might actually come up with something very interesting. And this can actually work for things that maybe you've seen too often. Maybe you've seen the same game again and again. So your goal to yourself would be then, how do I not do that? And sometimes that's where the idea will trigger. So this is more of a reverse logic process. It'll work for some of you, not necessarily the best for all of you, though. All right, so this is one that we are used to, basically, if you've ever watched TV. This is almost what every single sitcom is based off of, and most dramas, is this idea of forced relationships. When you throw things that are not meant to be together, you have so much fodder for a story, it's ridiculous. That's why most shows do this. They do this because it generates ideas without having external plot lines. There's a reason for this. This is a great mechanic in itself. So sometimes you might think, well, this type of game and this type of game really shouldn't go together. What happens when they do? Well, now you have something maybe no one else has done, right? Anything that causes friction between things that are happening in your game are already going to create some sort of relationship or output from it. If you like what that's creating, you've come up with something new, right? This can be combining ideas, combining mechanics. You could literally try to smash together two games that already exist. I think there's an entire BGG forum all about it, making rules. But they're fun creative exercises. Even if this doesn't turn into something that you are hoping to one get published, at the end of the day, it is a great creative exercise because there's a lot of problem solving that comes into trying to put things that don't want to go together. Because you have to figure out what's the patch. What's that bridge that's going to make them work together? Because once you do that, think where that idea can go. You're probably already somewhere no one else has been. And that's how you kind of come up with originality too. You can use existing ideas to come up with something very original, but you have to give it that spin. And usually that's what comes from you, right? That's your view of it. So just remember, you all have very different views of something. That makes it unique enough that you'll come up with something interesting if you get that right click. And so obviously these are just famous, different cartoons or shows where we can already see that The Odd Couple is literally called The Odd Couple. Is when you have that combination, it's already creating enough by itself that you can run with it. All right, so this one, attribute listing. So I'll give you a word. See if you can come up with this. Just free flow it. And this is a good excuse to get into the stop saying no to your brain thing, because there's no wrong answer on this one. Free flow it. Write down everything you can possibly think of, attributes, characters, thoughts of any kind that's connected to the word Muppet. Some of you are seeing it. Some of you are hearing words. Some of you are writing words. Again, you'll all think differently, but try to generate as much as you can, as fast as you can, but don't stop yourself. All right? And this is really good for theming. So let's say that you really want to work with a theme. You can work with mechanics too. You're starting with that basic idea. You want to write down everything that your brain spawns on that one idea. Because either some of them will go together or a tangent starts and you start to follow that tangent and you've just gone somewhere really interesting there. But if you stop yourself at any time and you're thinking too much about what you're writing because it's got to be the right answer, there's no right answer. You need to stop that. All right? Stop letting your brain say no. Just go. So this one may not end up being your technique for generating ideas per se. This might be a really good exercise to start before you want to start generating your ideas. Again, going back to those visual slides, let's say that you wanted to create that beaver game. Well, if you put beaver at the top of a page, or like beaver dam or something like that, every single thing you're about to list could probably go into your game, right? So that's enough by just having the headline of a mechanic or a theme or whatever it is. Everything that spawns is usable. And you can do this too as a way of figuring out, why do I like a game? Because if you like a game for a certain reason, usually if you can find a way to put that into your own game, you're on the right track. So if you picked your favorite game and you put that at the top of the page and you came up with a list of everything you associate with that game, I bet you a lot of them are actually either your favorite idea of a trigger or something emotional. And so whatever those two things are, try to pull that aside and say, okay, then what would my version of that look like? All right, so a big thing in helping changing the way that you think is that you gotta practice. And it's not just about generating ideas. Sometimes you have to change the way, your thought patterns. Anyone who's really into puzzles, you know that the more you do puzzles, the faster you get at them, right? Or if you do whatever it is, it could be number, words, visuals, anything like that. So going through, most of you have probably done riddles and puzzles before, but how many of you have done writing prompts, right? So writing prompts are a great way to say, well, what would that story be? Because at the end of the day, unless it's abstract, every game has a story. Even abstracts borderline have stories, though they're usually pasted on. But your game has a story. That story is what everything's falling out of. And hopefully the mechanics are kind of driven by that story. You can see when they don't work, but you want that. So the idea is that maybe if you're kind of already in the place where you practice the puzzles or you're good at riddles or whatever it is, you've got the problem-solving brain down. But what about the other side of it? So you can Google all you want writing prompts. There are so many of them, it's ridiculous, because obviously it's a huge exercise in schools, right, or creative writing. But I don't know how many people use them for game design. But how many people could have used what you came up with from that one about you're about to crash? How many people could have used that as a game, right? That was like 2 sentences. And most of you probably already had an idea of what that would look like. Doesn't take much. But you kind of have to give yourself those excuses to have these thoughts. And sometimes writing prompts are those excuses to say, what would happen if I let my brain go down this path? All right? So anything that will spawn ideas, if you're not the visual person, maybe you're someone that's more where the writing is going to help, find those writing prompts. Read the story. What does it make you think? What does it make you feel? Where's that going? What mechanic would you attach to that? How could you deliver that idea, right? And that's where a lot of that comes from. And it doesn't really matter which way you do it, mechanic or theme first. Either which way, you're probably going to get to the same endpoint as long as they work together. All right, so here's a big one. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, is if you don't set yourself up for what you need, this can't happen anyway. So a big one is you really have to give yourself time. I'm sure everyone's familiar with Stephen King. If you ever get a chance, his book called On Writing is kind of autobiographical, but he talks a lot about the writing process. And it's really interesting from a creative perspective of somebody who looks at it both as creativity and a job. And he basically says that if you can't write for 10 minutes every day, you're not meant to be writing. Now, I'm not saying you have to do game design every day, but if you're not affording yourself this time, when are you doing it? Right? When are you getting the practice? When are you creating ideas? If you know you're somebody that comes up with ideas in the shower, well, maybe you need to go have more showers, right? Just give yourself that time. It doesn't have to be for a purpose. If you need to sit on a bus to come up with ideas, go ride around in a circle. It really doesn't matter because it's not that much of your time, is it? But if that's what you need to come up with ideas or to have that stimulus you need, do it, right? But we don't do this very often for ourselves. And this is the important part. Now, you can still do a lot of this stuff on the go, only if you're that type of person who can actually have other stimulus around you trigger you. If you need that quiet space, if you need people to be like just tuned out, unless you have like the best headphones ever, you're gonna have to go to a quiet space to do this. But if you're someone who likes a lot of stimulus and noise, you can probably go anywhere. Just find the one that makes sense to you, okay? This might be a little trial and error. Hopefully most of you know yourself well enough to know what makes you feel comfortable. If you don't, start thinking in your head. When you start having ideas, just pull back for a second and say, what's helping me right now with this thought process? Why can I generate ideas when I'm sitting here instead of I'm over there, right? What's the difference? Because once you've isolated that, you've already come up with your creative process. This is what you need to create. Just a lot of us don't think about what we need. We just think it's gonna happen. I don't know about you, but like things don't just magically click like that. Sometimes you have to make them happen. So again, figure out where, think back, what was that place or places that if you sit down or whatever it is you're doing, no matter what, the ideas start to flow, okay? Maybe it's Starbucks, maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's watching TV. It doesn't really matter, but this will be something. All right, so you've generated all of these ideas. Now you actually have to choose one to do something with. So how do you do that? Well, okay, so this is something I say to my students all the time when we're doing writing, is if you're not interested in it, are you gonna have a lot to say? No, you won't. You're gonna get roadblocked. You've already stopped yourself because you're not inspired by it. You know what you're inspired by because you just got excited by it. Or that idea train just didn't stop for it, right? If you looked at it right now on your paper, hopefully if you're making notes, the minute you looked at it, if you're already having more ideas, That's the thing you need to be working on. If you think about something and you kind of hit a wall already, hang on to the idea, write it down, but that's probably not the thing you should be working on right now because you're just going to get frustrated. Don't set yourself up to fail by picking things that aren't necessarily achievable for you now. Doesn't mean it's not achievable later. You just didn't have the inspiration yet. And so you hear a lot of people talking about muses, but it's really important. You need to be inspired by something to care enough to follow through with it. Otherwise, I mean, how many projects have you started and never finished, right? Because you lose inspiration. And I'm sure we all have a ton of those, right? Those half-written stories, those half-started games, that half-started art project, that woodworking thing you're doing in the garage, whatever it is, right? You stopped it for a reason. You didn't care anymore. You don't feel like doing it. The minute you don't feel like doing it, it is the wrong thing to be doing. Because your whole point is still to say, okay, but I need the creative process to keep going. So choosing something may seem easy, but it's not necessarily. So you might get some practice. You're gonna start to learn what things inspire you very quickly. Again, if you get really excited about something and you filled up a page in like 2 seconds, work on that thing. Even if maybe it comes before something you're currently working on. I don't know about you guys, everyone's a little bit different, but I can't do one thing at a time. Like, I just can't. I can't work on one thing at a time. But part of what's good about that is that sometimes when I'm trying to problem solve for one thing, I get inspiration for something totally different. So sometimes my games are helping to like piggyback and correct each other because they're constantly kind of flowing into each other where I might have come up, as I said, for a solution for one or an idea for one that doesn't quite fit it, but what if I put it here instead? And sometimes that can really help you from stagnating. The one problem I've noticed a lot with new designers is they hang on to one idea so tight and work on it for so long, it becomes a problem of, can you take feedback on it? Can you change it? Are you in a position to, I hate to say it, just gut the thing? Because if you can't, you're too attached. And if you're too attached, you're not gonna be objective, which means you're not really gonna hear what people are telling you. All right, so my advice just in general is when you're trying to do this is have maybe a couple things going so you never really stop. Because again, your brain really is a muscle that you're working, and if you stop doing this, you're not as good at it anymore. Think about any type of, especially if you've ever been into any type of creative outlet of any kind. Let's say you paint, draw, whatever it is. If you stop for a couple years, do you think you're as good as you used to be? No. Trust me, if you put down that pencil for a while and pick it up again, you are nowhere near as good as you used to be because it's practice. And creativity is practice too, even though I think a lot of people don't consider it that. But that's what it is. It's practice. There's a reason why people get faster and faster at it. All right, so hopefully some of the ideas that you've been working on while we've been sitting here have sort of triggered something where you are thinking, hey, that would be interesting. I would do that. Because the next part is then you have to actually make the thing, right? And this is another roadblock for some people. But if you did the process of going through all the idea generation, you've come up with a thing that you're inspired by, this part should get exciting. You should want to make the thing. You should want to see it in front of you in real life, all right? That thing you're picturing, that thing you've written the whole description out of. But now you got to make it. Because if you don't make it, you don't know if it works. And you'd rather it fail fast than just kind of sit there forever and it becomes this pet project that you never do. Because sometimes when we're doing that, we're really doing it to protect ourselves, not necessarily to keep a good idea, right? And it goes back to, it's not the easiest thing in the world, but you really got to learn to put yourself out there to get feedback. And it does take some interpretation of what people are saying, and it takes a bit of a thick skin as you keep going, because someone's ripping apart your thing. It can hurt. But the problem is you're creating art. So isn't all art subjective? And the minute that happens, doesn't that mean that everybody feels like they have an opinion on it? Yeah, so unfortunately, that is the boat you're now in. It's not a bad place, but you have to know that everybody thinks they can have an opinion on something that you created. There's not a lot of other places out there that work like that. All right, and that's just something that comes with it. You get used to it. I mean, I'm assuming a lot of you probably are from Toronto or the Toronto area. You probably have gone to things like designer nights and stuff like that. We have a ton of talent in Toronto, ton of published designers. A lot of Americans ask what the hell's in the water up here. But there's people who will grind out your games really fast. But you have to be okay with that. Now, if you are, you're going to get that thing stripped down to like what it needs to be like right away. If you're not, that's going to be another thing you got to practice if this is what you want. I can't say I'm the best in the world at it, but it's something you got to kind of work at, right? So that's a big one. So hopefully you come up with something that you've liked while we've gone through some of these ideas. You've got your bits box in front of you. So the idea is now, can you put it together? So we are at a prototyping convention. Make something. All right? You've got ideas. You've got pieces. You've got technically everything you need. You've got playtesters galore. Make something. Find out if it works right away. Because if it doesn't, scrap it and try again. If you didn't waste the pieces, you didn't waste your time because you've already eliminated something you don't want to do. Don't do it again. Do something different, right? But now you know it doesn't work, or now you know it does work. You didn't sit on it for like 6 months. You're already there. You're already on the next step. That's the important part. So the hope is that you have things in front of you right now that inspired you enough. I see people building. Hopefully it's a dexterity game. I don't know. But go for it. That's really what this all comes down to when you put it all together, is at the end of the day, you just have to do it and you just have to go for it. So if you're going to take anything away from this, just stop saying no to yourself. All right? It really is, as I said, it's the improv game. If you said no, you've lost. You're out. If you can keep saying yes, and whatever it is that's about to come out of that, if you've ever played any type of improv, you know what I mean, just go with it, because that discomfort you feel at first, it goes away really fast because you get used to that creative outlet, that creative exercise. It's only when you first start that you have any of those pains. They never happen again. All right? I will honestly say I used to be shy once upon a time. Right? Most people know me like, yeah, right. No, I did. But when you have to get up in front of people all the time, like I do at school, like I did in advertising, you can't be that way anymore. So you just stop. It takes practice, right? You don't want to let everybody know you feel that way, but eventually you stop feeling that way. Yeah, there's still going to be those little butterflies as you go up, but at the end of the day, you're doing the same thing you've been doing always, right? So the only difference between standing up in front of you guys today and what I did like 3 hours ago is you're just much bigger people, right? And there's probably only slightly more of you than there actually are in my class. But that's basically what it comes down to, guys, is just let your brain be creative. Give yourself the prompts, stimulus, or environment you need, and you really won't have a problem coming up with ideas, especially if you practice. Because it is a muscle. You have to practice it. But figure out the ones that work for you. I think there was like something like 8 to 10 examples of just how to make an idea. There's got to be at least 2 that work for you, if not all of them. And if they all work, think how many ideas you just came up with. Right? So hopefully this gave you kind of some places where you could start to practice and start feeling more comfortable so that you don't worry about where do all these ideas come from, because you're already doing it. It's just someone never told you, by the way, this is how I do it. Now I do almost all of these except for like 1. But I didn't even think about it until I had to sit down to make a presentation about it, because I just do it, because it becomes natural after time, right? So allow yourself that. And this convention is a great excuse to practice that, because you're about to sit down in a ton of games. Give feedback, right? Really think about why you liked or didn't like something. Don't just say it. Try to help them come up with a solution, because aren't you going down a creative path just by doing that? Now, at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with giving away ideas. Hopefully none of us are those type of people who are like, mine. No. Be a community, right? It's their idea. Your idea came from their idea. What does it matter if you give it to them? Do you know what I mean? Hopefully you do. Share. That's what I'll say. Share. Be inspired by each other. Come up with ideas based on other people's games. As I said, make something and just play it. Whether it works or not, you will know in like 1 minute, right? But that's really what it comes down to, is you just got to try. So that's pretty much it. Hopefully it works for you guys.
Do you want to take some questions?
Oh, sure, if there's questions. I was hoping you guys were just going to make stuff.
We got time for questions. Anyone have one?
What's the one thing you can't do?
The one I don't do? I don't make attribute lists. I'm not a list person. My brain's going to already start firing down a whole storyline before I ever got to the list. I think in stories. If that makes any sense at all, I think in stories. All my games are stories. They might be like slice of life stories. They might be a whole start to finish story. But I always wanted to write. It's just, I don't have the discipline for it. So in the story I wanted to tell that I could never put into a novel, I could pop out in a game in a few days. What a way faster delivery method, right? And I still get the satisfaction of creating that thing without having to do all the filler words that go with it. Right? Well, who needs dialogue? I have a game.
When do you decide that you've had enough feedback?
Would you really change anything else after that? I mean, you can always be the perfectionist.
Just so we can hear the question,
Yeah.
what was it?
When do you decide you've had enough feedback?
When do you decide you've had enough feedback?
Some people will never stop, but then when are you ever going to hand off the game? Is a problem too. You really do hit a deadline. Part of it is too, it depends on if the game is purely for you, or at that point, I mean, eventually you might be asked to make stuff, in which case you don't really have a time, like you have a timeline to meet. You can't be constantly dragging your feet on, but this person said this and this person said this and things like that. Like sometimes you just have to make decisions. But if it's just yours for fun, you can play it as much as you want. But remember, there's technically no such thing as done, right? So if you're hoping for done, I don't think it's coming, right? To be fair. So you'll have to kind of draw your own line at some point and say, but I really like it. And so do other people, right? I mean, if you're someone who really wants to get in front of publishers, then go ask publishers. Sit down in front of them, pitch your stuff, get feedback from them. And when they give you feedback, you can ask for specific types of feedback. Sometimes they're going to say no to something, but not because it wasn't a good idea. It's just not the right game for them. But sometimes it's really nice just to have that set of eyes looking at something that says, well, they know what a finished game, or at least close enough to finished game should look like, that they can tell you, this isn't ready, or no, this is ready, it's just not for us, right? And so sometimes you need that feedback. But again, you can decide you're never done, but then what are you going to do with it, right? Does that make sense? All right. Was there any more? One in the back?
Hello.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, with your students, what have been the most effective activities that you've used to generate creativity?
So funny enough, the one I did where you guys are hurtling through wherever it is you are, I do as a writing exercise called expanded sentences. And I do ones, so for example, the one I did this year, it's the start of my writing workshops. I said, okay, there's a bear, he's in the forest, he's getting food. What color is the bear? They all have a different answer. What does the forest look like? Okay, they all have a different answer. What's he eating? They all have a different answer. Shouldn't all that be in the sentence then? And so when you start to have the simplest of prompts of any kind, and you actually have to stop and say, this is what it looks like, this is what it sounds like, this, like, actually have something that you would be worth reading, well, funny, that's exactly what we just did with the visualization technique, right? Collaboration is another really good one. When you have a whole bunch of kids spitting out ideas all at once and you put kind of a cluster of them on a board, it's enough usually to inspire them to go down their own thought processes because they've seen enough other people's thoughts. So a lot of things we do at school is thought modeling. How do you think? Because we don't think the same. And when you see how enough other people think, you'll pick the one that works for you, right? That will inspire you. Hope that made sense.
Where do you teach?
Oh, I'm at Oriole Park at Egan Avenue.
I thought it was interesting you mentioned not feeling like you have enough discipline to be a writer, because that's sort of, I find the problem I have the most is when I have an idea and I get to the creation stage and it just becomes so overwhelming. How am I going to make 200 cards for this deck builder that I have an idea for? Do you have any tricks for overcoming that?
Don't make 200. Because you don't know if your idea works. Well, you don't know if your idea works.
If you have a really ambitious idea, I guess, and then you get worried about.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily, maybe it wouldn't be that hard to make 200 cards, but I get worried about it because maybe I could do a bunch of duplicates and there would be a way around it. But it's the the bigger the idea is, the scarier creating it.
It is, and you're gonna have to be kind of organized for that and give yourself time. That's not a finish up quick kind of thing. So you have two routes with that. If you're willing to test it out to know it's worth going down, come up with this scenario, right? The scenario doesn't need all your pieces. It just needs, how would you play the first round? What would that round look like? What pieces do I need for that intro level? What does level 1 equipment look like? Whatever it is. If you think that you can put enough of idea that you've worked the whole idea out yourself, then go for it, right? You might have to map it out a little bit and come up with a bunch of lists. You could be a scrap of paper person where you're just constantly like writing scribbles on a piece of paper. If any of you know John Gilmore, he basically writes words on a card and has a million of them like that. They're blank, they're just typed, there's nothing on them but that word. But that's enough to get the prototype started. Right? So sometimes, unless you're someone, okay, I'm a bit of a crazy person. When I think of an idea, I have it visually in my head to the point where I know what I want that game to feel like. And if I can't make it so that people can see it, they're not getting the experience I want. So I will try to plot out a whole game in my head before I make it. But I'm one of those people who goes like, I will make the whole thing. Okay, I'm that person. Not everybody's that person. You don't have to be that person. I'm just that weirdo. All right? And everyone's laughing because they've seen my prototypes. But I'm that weirdo who does that. You don't have to be, but if you think like that and that makes you feel better about what you're creating because it's about the feel for you too. If you're like, I'm going to say this. If you're a thematic first person, you probably are more like me. You want to see and feel and just the whole thing goes together. If you're a mechanics first person, you just want to know your mechanic works. Strip it down to nothing. Who cares? As long as the mechanic works, keep building from there. Right? Does that kind of answer your question? Okay. Was there anyone? I see two.
Do you ever design games for your students or small little things that you could make in the classroom? And then how does that connect between your actual designing versus making little kid games? So what kind of games would you do with your students, I guess?
So funny, I have games that they're not allowed to play. But I have games that they have played. I actually have videos of them. I have videos of them as a sort of like a playthrough video for a kids game that that it was co-designing that was getting pitched to a toy company. And so stuff like that, I totally let them play because if they're not having fun, then this is not meant for that demographic. But it's funny, there's things that you do that you might not realize are game-based. Like it wasn't until I played one of Shannon's escape room in a box games the other day. And I was solving the puzzles really fast just because there was stuff that I did with my students. And I never really thought of them as games per se. I thought of them as these exercises in thought, right? And so I was making games without realizing I was making games. But anything that becomes novel, fun, or exciting is memorable, right? That's really where memory comes from. So if you ever want to have a whole talk on memory, come talk to me later. It's like it's my little pet project for myself because I have ADD. And so I always had this problem where I didn't remember a lot of things because I couldn't focus enough on them. So I've been correcting my memory for years now. Most people can't even tell I have ADD. They just think I'm like an overexcited person. But because you forget all those things, you've got to start working on your memory. And one of the main triggers for memory, and this is a really good one for games too, is if it's fun, novel, or exciting, something about it stands out in some particular way, even if it's because it's just wacky and weird, like a Dr. Seuss example, you'll remember it. And things that are memorable tend to be memorable for the right reasons. Occasionally it's memorable for the wrong reasons. But that's how I get my students to learn, is if they don't remember it, then what was the point, right? And so sometimes you have to think, even from more of a psychological standpoint, how am I going to connect to this? How am I going to make them think about it or recall it again or bring it back, sort of thing.
Could you go a bit more into detail about co-designing with people, like the process, how it generally looks, and any general tips that you might have?
Sure. Just be careful that whoever you're talking to, you're not overpowering them or not overpowering you. And so you'll know your personality. If you're more of a mild personality and the other person's not, they're already probably steamrolling you, right? They can't help it. You're not saying anything. If you're someone who collaborates a lot, hopefully in your job or your something you do on the side or whatever it is, you already know you can collaborate. So you're good to go. If you're someone who works by yourself almost all the time and you prefer to do that, you may want to be careful about collaboration. It doesn't necessarily sound like it would be per se the right thing for you. But when it comes to collaboration, first off, just make sure that you guys are on the same page. Do you know this is 50-50? Are you putting in the same workload? If you're working on enough games over time, it wouldn't matter as much. Maybe there's a bit of give and take, but when you're first starting out, you don't want to feel like you're doing everything and the other person's doing nothing. It really helps to find people who have strengths that you don't. So for example, if you are super mechanical, well, maybe you need a super thematic person, because when you're brainstorming, they're seeing what that game would look like while you're thinking about how that game would play, right? And so you're using your strengths together, not against each other. If you're both mechanical or both thematic, it might work, but you might not be picturing the same thing, right? In which case, you can force the things together, right? And that was one of the examples, but that doesn't mean it's always gonna work. So the other thing is make sure that person hears you and is allowing your ideas to come out. You'll have to get used to how someone else thinks too. So sometimes, because my brain goes off in tangents, either you gotta let that happen or you're gonna have to rein me back in. It has to be one of the two. I don't care which it is, but that's the only two things that would work with me. If someone tried anything different, they already wouldn't really work, because they've actually cut off what I'm thinking now. Because it's kind of like they're the ones now saying no to my brain. Even if I'm not, they are, right? And you don't want someone else saying no to you either. Because not until you get to the choose and actually making it part, where you're like, maybe we don't want to include that, maybe we want to do it, whatever it is. But when you're brainstorming and you're trying to put those ideas together, if someone keeps shutting down your thoughts, I don't think that's a good person to work with, right? And you might just find your things don't jive. As I said, I've tried collaborating with people and I can pop out a game in an hour. I've tried collaborating with other people and it is just a mess and it won't work. Just because it doesn't work together. So it's up to you. I mean, there's nothing wrong with opposites. Sometimes actually that's the best thing to look for. But it's also something good if you're looking for someone who's fairly similar too. I would go down one of those two roads. I don't think I'd really look for anything else if it was me, because there's already going to be enough personality issues that you're not really going to get to the game. Does that kind of make sense? Is there any other particular questions about that, or does that kind of cover it? Okay. Good? Any more?
Any other questions? Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Erica. That was really great.